This video is super long overdue, but I finally finished this walnut and elm exposed joinery live edge side table. You guys are gonna really like it. It turned out amazing. I'm just gonna go ahead and leave some links here, guys, to my Instagram where you can go follow me. Also check me out on TikTok, but let's dive into the video and get started on this build. Alright, so I'm really excited to share this project with you guys. It turned out really amazing. It all starts here with this elm live edge top and this giant slab of walnut, which I'm going to turn into the legs. The elm top I actually stabilized years ago. I have a short way back on my YouTube channel covering those butterfly keys getting installed, and so that's just been sitting around, and I finally had a design in mind to turn this into a little side table. I'll get started by breaking down the walnut slab here. This is 6/4 walnut. Walnut's very expensive now. It's like $18 a board foot or something like that. So I think this slab was like $300. So I'm getting it cut down into the approximate pieces here. As you can see in the image, this is gonna be 3 monolith legs that kind of lift up this little side table, and it's gonna be really cool. And it starts out by just breaking this down. You can see the track saw here doesn't actually plunge quite to the depth I need to get through this walnut. So what I do is take 3 passes to get it down to the max depth, and then there's just a tiny fragment keeping that board attached, and I just put it on its side and kind of break it off. It tears pretty cleanly since it's basically cut through. Now that I've got one edge cleaned up on each of these pieces, I can bring it over to the table saw and get it ripped through to get it to width. Now I'm keeping these all a little oversized to start because there's going to be some milling involved, and you never want to cut things exactly to your dimension until you're ready to do so. So I'm just getting things measured out, laid out here. You can see here, in order to get the length I needed on this board, I'm actually having to cut it at a diagonal. It also makes the grain on this particular piece a little straighter, so it looks a little nicer in the end. So you just want to be careful and lay out your parts and make sure you're getting them cut out correctly so you don't waste any material. With the pieces cut to their size, I can start to lay out the mortises here. So there's going to be 4 mortises total. That's going to hold the maple brackets that actually hold the side table. And so I start out by drilling out those mortises with a slightly undersized drill bit. I'm using a drill guide here to just keep me nice and straight. And I just drill down to the depth and clean it out as I go. We'll be coming back through with hand chisels to bring these exactly to the marking line. Of course, you don't want to just cut right to your shoulder line on the get-go. You got to work your way back because that chisel acts as a wedge, and it'll actually wedge you past the shoulder line if you don't have just a little material remaining. So I'm just taking out these larger chunks with some coarse passes, and as I creep up to the line, I take finer and finer passes. You can see these turned out really clean, really sharp, really crisp corners, so I was really happy with that, but it's not over here. I still got to add a curve into these legs, which we'll be doing later, but for now, those mortises look really good. Now, I still don't have a bandsaw after all these years, so I actually brought this to my old coworker, Jeremy, so thanks, Jeremy, for helping me out with this, but right here, we're using his bandsaw to rough cut the curves onto these legs. You can see we're staying outside the line there because we'll be using a flush trim bit with a template to actually cut that right to the line. But this made quick work of it and worked really well. Now back in my shop, I can get to the flush trimming with the router. So I attach the template using CA glue and some Scotch tape, and then I just take small passes here to creep up on that template. You don't want to take aggressive passes here, especially for how high the bit is raised up. So just go slow and easy with it. Make sure you're going in the correct direction with the router, and it's really not that hard, but you just gotta be slow and careful. It turns out nice. You can see on the back end of that cut, I do have to go uphill with the bit a little bit because it's actually was tearing out in the direction I was going. So sometimes you do have to do that with the router. You just got to be really controlled and keep your grip on the router because it can have a tendency to fly off. Now onto the bigger leg, I can get the template attached using the same method. I put a clamp on there just to keep it in place. Once that's settled, I can come back and do the same thing, just taking shallow passes here and creeping up on that template. And it turns out really nice. You'll see here that the mortise line started to open up a little, and we'll address that right here. Okay, so a couple of mistakes and a couple fixes that I came up with for this. So first we can see here, as I showed when I cut these, because I didn't chisel perfectly dead straight in a complete flat plane, which is inherent of hand chiseling, when I actually cut the curve here for the profile, this line for the mortise wasn't a nice, clean, sharp line, and I need it to be because the piece that's protruding out doesn't have a shoulder, so you're gonna see this entire joint. And so the solution I came up with was using the 3D model to create this 3D printed template, which actually matches the curvature here, so that I can just slide it on right here, clamp it in place, and just cut out or route out a slightly larger mortise and then square it off with a chisel. So let's take a look from above. Okay, a little tough to see here, but you can see with this template in place that there's actually a little bit more to route out there. And so we're just gonna enlarge the mortise just slightly in order to give us a nice sharp edge. So let's go ahead and clamp this and route it out. Okay, so here you can see it after doing the router, and we can see we've got a super sharp clean edge here. I've just got to square off the corners, of course, but overall it's much cleaner looking, and we just enlarged it a little bit. It doesn't really take away from the design I had, so that worked out great. All we have to do, because the template bit couldn't finish and reach the bottom, is I'll just chisel out that by hand, but that'll be no problem. The other mistake I made, unfortunately, is a really avoidable mistake, and that is that the thickness that I could find in this maple in the max was about 3 inches here, and I actually laid out the mortise just a little too wide. You can see here there's actually a 1/4 inch gap, so that was just a layout mistake when I did it. So what I'm going to do is cut some walnut and just put a little shim in and then flush trim it and sand it here on the inside edge, and in the finished product I don't think you'll even see it at all, so I'm not really concerned about it, but kind of annoying because this was really avoidable. Now again, I've said this before, but in these one-off custom pieces, things are gonna occasionally go wrong, and so I like to show these fixes I come up with. Some are kind of given fixes, but some are more unique, but it just will help show you guys what you can do in these instances to correct things. Here, in this case, adapting for the too wide of a mortise that I made, these wedges go in, and then really by the time I flush trim them, you can't even tell they're there in the final piece. So worked out really well, and I'm using these little wedges here to really clamp that and get the seam really flawless. You can see that mirror polish on the chisel here. That's exactly how you want the back of your chisels to look, because remember, the cutting edge of your chisel is both the front and the back side of the chisel, so you need both polished. And then I can come through and just carefully trim down that piece until it's a really nice and flush joint. You can't get in here with the hand plane, which is what you'd normally use, because of course it's a curved surface, so that's why I'm going with the chisel here to clean it up. And with a little sanding there, you can see that seam become almost invisible, and by the time we get those maple braces in there, you're really not going to see it at all. Now I missed the footage of me actually installing the leveling feet, but here on the bottom of each leg I am drilling out to recess some leveling feet because the elm top's a little warped, and so it needed a bit of leveling by the time you attach the legs. So this is how I do that. I do a counter bore and then I drill for the threaded insert and put in the threaded legs, which you'll see later on in the final picture. I'm adding a really generous round over here to the legs on every edge because I don't want this thing to look blocky in the end. It needs to look really organic and really fluid, so this round over helps clean up those sharp edges. With the round over on, I can set those walnut legs aside and move on to the maple braces. So here I'm using some figured maple. It's not as curly as I maybe wanted to get, but it's all I could get. And so I'm starting out by just cutting these to rough length, and then I can get them milled down and start the shaping. Okay, so the way that this bench is designed, the grain orientation of these maple braces is really important. And by the way, you can see the nice raise on that piece of maple. This is from a bowl turning blank. But anyway, I needed a really thick piece in order to get the grain direction correct. If I did it incorrectly, which is a little hard to explain on this voiceover, but basically it would shear along the length of the wood fibers, which is something obviously you don't want to happen. So you have to start with a thick stock here for this particular design. And in a future video, I might go over that a little better, but that's why I'm starting with this bowl blank, which seems really bulky, but that's the way it had to be done. I'm again using these laser cut templates here to lay out the braces on these maple pieces. So this is where a laser cutter becomes really useful. I don't own one personally, but I do have one I'm able to use. And for these really organic fluid shapes, it just makes it that much easier to get these pieces done and get them done well. So to rough out the brace itself, I'm just using the table saw, kind of like I'm cutting a really large dado. So I get that cut out on the two pieces, and on the longer leg, I'll have a slightly different approach. Using a little combination square to line up those braces to make sure that the spot or the location these templates are attached are the same for each one. That's going to be super important to make sure the table is level. And then again, it's back to the router table with the flush trim bit to cut to that template. Here you want to go really slow and take careful passes because in the way that the grain's oriented here, it's really easy to break out those fibers. So just take it slow. And I actually made a few extras because I had to redo a couple until I got them to come out cleanly. And here I'm drilling out for the dowels that'll actually attach this brace to the tabletop. Doing it now while I have nice flat reference faces as opposed to later after all those round overs are in place. And then it's back to Jeremy's shop, the real all-star of this build, to help me cut out these bowl blanks into the rough shapes. This wouldn't have been possible without that bandsaw and without his help, so thanks, Jeremy. Then I can get those templates attached, again using the Scotch tape and some CA glue, and after letting that cure in place, it's back with the flush trim bit to get these cut to the template. So right here you can see me using a straight bit to cut this out, and this does an okay job, but those straight bits, especially when you're using the full length of the bit, they really just don't cut that cleanly. About halfway through I bought this Spitz and Bits Astra coated spiral bit, and it cuts way smoother, leaves way better shavings, and is just way easier to control. So I was really happy to switch over to this. It really did a lot better job. Now these super wide blanks, of course, couldn't be cut just from the top with the router bit, so after going about halfway with the handheld router, I brought it over to the table with the flush trim bit with the bearing mounted on the bottom, and that way I was able to finish off these cuts. This was a really large depth of cut, and so I just kind of did it the best way I could with each piece. Each one needed slightly different work holding in order to get it done safely and well. So this is kind of how I went about it. And then once those were finally cut to shape, I just chamfered the bottom edge, which will be going into the mortise, in order to help them slide into place. So it was a lot of back and forth to get the fit right with these large mortises, and if it was still fitting too tight, I just came back and ran it over the sander just to slim it down a few thousandths at a time, and I just did this repeatedly until it fit snugly into place. If you've been enjoying this video so far and enjoy my channel, I would really appreciate if you guys subscribe. I'm really trying to grow my channel this year and make woodworking and my designs my full-time thing. So it would mean a lot if you guys subscribe and check out some of my other videos, and thanks for watching this one. And so now it's time for the first test fit here, the first mock-up, and this is a pretty snug fit around those brackets, so you just want to wedge them into place carefully and slowly, and then I can get it propped up and put those opposing two legs on the other side. And this is where it really started to take form, and I was getting really excited about how this thing was going to turn out. It's pretty sturdy, and it still needed the legs actually attached, so here's just an overview of how it was looking. The top is going to be attached with dowels going through the top part of the bracket, through oversized ones in the top, and then into the bottom part of the bracket. So I just lay those out with a brad point bit, and then I can just carefully drill those out. And I drill them again a little oversized in the top, just to allow for any wood movement of the elm top. Again, I'm applying a pretty heavy round over to all the maple brackets here to turn it from sort of these blocky, sharp-edged pieces into these really organic forms. And you'll see the difference after running them through the router table. And then, of course, this took a lot of hand sanding to really get everything smoothed out. But these really transform from just being blocky to being really nice and freeform. I pre-finished the maple pieces because I knew it was going to be hard to finish them once they were in place, and I wanted to do all the sanding and finishing before that. So I just kind of scribed where the line is that'll be meeting with the legs, and I'll come back after and apply a little finish right on the joint line after I've cleaned up the glue squeeze out. You can see here that having the finish on the walnut legs already really helps you clean up that glue, and that's why I like to pre-finish things when possible before glue-ups and assemblies. It just helps manage the glue, and glue can be a real pain and leave a real stain if you don't get it rid of it all. So with all the glue-ups finished and everything ready for the final assembly, I went ahead and applied finish to the top. I'm just using a polyurethane here, and I do like 3 or 4 coats until I get a really nice durable top. But otherwise, it's on to final assembly and then attaching the top with the dowels and some beauty shots. So I'm going to leave it here with the commentary and let the video wrap up for itself. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, if you subscribe to me, it'll really help my channel out, and I'd really appreciate it. But stay tuned right till the end because there's some pretty awesome shots to come here.